We are looking this morning at Genesis chapter 25 and 26. God is often referred to as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the Scriptures. These are the great patriarchs of the Old Testament, and you probably know a lot about Abraham. You probably know quite a bit about Jacob, but you probably don't know too much about Isaac. You know that, of course, he was the one that was just about sacrificed on the altar by Abraham. And there's not much actually in the Scriptures about Isaac. There are chapters, many chapters given to Abraham that we've been through, several chapters given to Jacob that we're going to go through, but Isaac claims just barely over a chapter in Genesis. If Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were an Oreo cookie, the cream in the middle would be very thin. There's no double stuff here and no mega stuff here, and yet Isaac is quite an important character and patriarch of the Scriptures. So it's too long for me to read this passage in this setting, but you can follow along in your Bibles in Genesis chapter 25 and 26. You will remember that Abraham arranged for his servant to get a wife for Isaac among his own relatives, and God orchestrated events, and that all worked out so that Rebekah came. Isaac had never seen her before, and she arrives, and he marries her, and her name is Rebekah. Before that marriage, however, Isaac had settled in Beer Lahairoi. And that is an interesting place for Isaac to choose to settle, if you think about it. That is the place that Hagar went out to when Sarah cast her away and sent her away, and she got out in the desert, and there was no food and water, and she thought they were just going to die. And God met her there. And Hagar returns then to Sarah and submits to her, and has the responsibility of kind of being the caretaker, the nanny, if you will, for Isaac. And she raises him up. And I'm sure that over those many years, that Hagar had told Isaac that story of how God had come and met her and spoke to Hagar, who was just an Egyptian maidservant, and how God had came and rescued her. And of all the places for Isaac to choose to dwell and to live, he chose that place where God had met Hagar. And I think it was because Isaac wanted to have that same experience. He wanted to know that God was going to be there for him and come and surround him. When Rebekah was brought to Isaac, he takes her into his mother's tent to marry her and to consummate the marriage. And we are told that that was significant because Isaac was now comforted after his mother's death. But there's a difference between Abraham and Jacob, because both of those were both travelers. Abraham had traveled quite a bit in his life. Jacob travels quite a bit in his life. But Isaac never travels very far from home. He is quiet. He doesn't like confrontation. He's a peacemaker, and he will do anything to avoid trouble or strife or conflict. He will just completely move away from it if that's what it takes to have peace. That's what he likes. Rebekah, however, is the much more dominant personality in that marriage relationship. Isaac was already 40 years old when Rebekah was brought to him as his wife. And they spent the next 20 years of their life childless. Interesting how that worked out in Abraham's life with Sarah. And now Isaac is beginning to wonder if he will have any children also. And at the end of 20 years, the Scriptures tell us that Isaac then prayed for his wife. that God would give her a child. And God gave them two. I wonder, sometimes men, if it should take us 20 years to pray for our spouses. Too often, I am guilty, even as your pastor. I pray for a lot of other things, but I probably don't pray for my wife as much as I should. And so just this quiet, quick reminder here, men, that one of your responsibilities as man of the house is to be faithful in prayer for your spouse. Remember to do that. Isaac prayed, and Rebekah became pregnant with twins. The pregnancy, however, was difficult. It was hard. And so Rebekah herself prayed about it, and the Lord told her, she says, "What is going on with me?" And the Lord spoke to her and told her that she was having twins, and that the older one would serve the younger twin. The two boys are Esau. He is named that because he's hairy and red-skinned, and that's kind of what Esau means. He's the oldest. And then there's Jacob, who is the youngest twin, and he comes out grasping at the heel, hanging on to Esau. And he is named that because of that grasping of the heel, and also because it implies that he is a deceiver. And as we get into the story of Jacob, we will see how Jacob does have a tendency towards deception. Isaac chooses to favor Esau, and Rebekah chooses to favor Jacob. And there is a place for that. There is a natural tendency for some of us to like certain tendencies in one child over another child. And we certainly ought to reward every positive behavior that we see in each child. But favoring here went beyond simply rewarding good behavior in one child over the behavior of another. Esau loved hunting and outdoor life, and Isaac loved his venison. And Isaac loved Esau. Jacob was more of a homeboy, and he loved domestic pursuits, and he loved to cook, and those kind of things, and Rebekah very much liked him. Again, it's very natural for us to like certain traits in each of our children, but we should love all of our children in all of their differences and understand that God wired and designed them all different from each other, and we should not be playing favorites to the extent that a child thinks that they are loved more than another child. Playing favorites did not work out so well in the life of Isaac and Rebekah, as we would come to see in the story. Esau is out one day hunting, and he comes home famished, the scriptures say, or starved to death. Jacob has some stew on cooking. And Esau asks for some stew, but Jacob thinks, because he's a deceiver, and quick in his mind, Jacob says, you sell me your birthright first, and I'll give you some stew. And Esau was so hungry that he sold it without much thought, or really getting any benefit for it. All he wanted right at the moment was to eat. And he sold his birthright, which was hugely important. It was his right. You know, the oldest son in those patriarchal times won half of the inheritance, regardless of how many children. And there were just a lot of rights and privileges that went with being the oldest in that culture. And Esau gave all that up for one pot of stew. There's a warning for us there. In the passion of the moment, you and I can make some great, grave mistakes. We need to be very, very careful and cautious that in the passion of the moment, when we're really hungry or we're really wrestling with temptation or something just goes against us, that we don't make some big, grave mistake that will cost us the rest of our lives. Something we don't want to sacrifice. Esau gave all that up for one pot of stew, one bowl of stew. And that brings us to Genesis chapter 26, the focus this morning, where we see convincing proof that indeed Isaac is a child of Abraham. First, God had made this covenant with Abraham, and God also comes now and he renews that covenant that he had made with Abraham, and he renews that with Isaac. Like Abraham, Isaac experienced a severe famine early in his life. And Isaac fled to Gerar, which is Philistine country, but it was within the property that God had promised to Abraham that his descendants would have. And he went over there into this Philistine country, and he intended to go on down to Egypt. And God appeared to him and told him to stay in Gerar, not to go down to Egypt. And it's interesting that Isaac chooses to obey God. God promises, if you stay in this land in Gerar, this is going to be your land because of the covenant I made with Abraham. And because of Abraham's obedience, I'm giving this land, and if you will stay here, this land will belong to you, and this land will belong to your descendants. To our knowledge, this is the very first time that God had ever spoken to Isaac directly. Abraham's obedience on Mount Moriah must have been something that Isaac could never ever forget, his father being willing to sacrifice him on the altar. And Isaac going along with that plan and cooperating with it until God rescues him and puts the ram there. But Isaac can never forget the obedience of his father. And so when God tells him not to go down to Egypt, but to stay there in Gerar, Isaac has learned that much from his father, to obey and to trust God and to stay there in Gerar. And so the covenant with Abraham has now been carried on into the life of Isaac. But as Abraham had some faults, so did Isaac. Isaac, like Abraham, used deception. When he got to Gerar, and he was fearful that the men of Gerar would kill him because Rebekah was so beautiful, as Abraham had been scared about Sarah, now Isaac was scared that the men of Gerar would look at Rebekah and say that they wanted her, and that they would kill him in order to get Rebekah. And so he lies, and he deceives them also, and he passes her off as his sister, instead of trusting God to watch over them and protect them. And in the end, he risks Rebekah's purity for his own protection. But there is a subtle difference between Abraham and Isaac. Isaac planned the deception long ahead of time. When he went down there, he already had this percolating in his mind, what he was going to do to protect himself when he got down there with Sarah. And he planned to tell the deception that Sarah was his sister. As far as we can tell, there is no planning, no premeditation about this at all in Isaac's life. They came and asked Isaac about his wife. And they said, man, Rebekah's just beautiful. And just out of, he didn't stop and think, he just let it come out. And instantly he deceives them and says, well, she's my sister. He resorted to it on the moment. Isaac, in this case, probably should have planned ahead. and come up with a better plan than deception. But he didn't. He just told the lie. Abimelech, and in this case also, Rebekah was not his sister, where Sarah was actually a half-sister of Abraham. Abimelech saw that Isaac treated Rebekah like a wife, though. He watched for a while. And he said, Rebekah's not his sister. That's not a way a man treats a sister. And so he went and rebuked Isaac, confronted Isaac, and he rebuked him. And the interesting thing in this passage is that Isaac's ethics were not near as good as Abimelech's ethics. Abimelech, this Philistine man, had a higher sense of ethics and what was right and wrong than Isaac did in this situation. And Abimelech knew that he and his men could not have another man's wife. Isaac's deception may have led them into guilt, and he was concerned about that. Abimelech was concerned that he would have been guilty and his men would have been guilty if they had listened to Isaac. And then we are told the next thing that happens is that Isaac returns to a place of blessing in his life. After being confronted by Abimelech, Isaac harvested a bumper crop. The Philistines around the area are just jealous. They're envious of that. They feared that eventually Isaac would become so strong that he would take over their land. Now, one of the interesting things in that culture, in any place that's dry, not like us right now, but digging a well was like a claim of ownership on the land. And you'll remember that Abraham, as he went through life and as he moved around quite a bit, he dug wells everywhere he went. And so as the Philistines got nervous about Isaac growing in his abilities and all of that, and that he might someday take over their land, they decided that one thing they needed to do was go plug up all these wells that Abraham had drilled and get rid of his claim to that land. And so that's the story behind all of that. They go and just fill in. And you're thinking, this is a dry place, and they're destroying the wells that provide water for the land that they want. But they're willing to do that just to make sure that Isaac doesn't get too much power there with all of his bumper crops and all of that. They asked Isaac, finally, just to move away. And Isaac, being passive, not wanting any confrontation, just got up and moved away. And he moved to the next place where Abraham had a well that they had plugged up. And Isaac goes and he unplugs the well, digs it all out again, gets water going, and pretty soon the Philistines follow him and say, you can't have that, that's our well. And instead of fighting, Isaac, what does he do? He runs. He does not like confrontation at all. So he packs up, moves again with all of his stuff and all of his people and all of his animals, and he moves to the next well that Abraham had dug so many years ago. And he gets there and unplugs the well, and pretty soon the Philistines come again and say, no, you can't be here. That's our well. And they possess it because they do not want Isaac getting any of their land. So they move on. That happens several times, and every time Isaac finally moves, and he gets to a place where another well that Abraham had drilled. And when he gets there, he unplugs that well. And as he does that, the Philistines don't follow him this time. And life is going well for Isaac. He's there, there's no dispute, there's no Philistines bothering him. He's got water, which is so important in that part of the country where it's so often so dry. And just when you expect Isaac to really settle down and stay put because he's got everything he's been wanting, he gets up and moves again. He leaves the well and the peace that he's had, and he goes to a place called Beersheba. Why would he do that? Why would he head to Beersheba? Well, Beersheba was the first place that Abraham took Isaac after Mount Moriah. After they sacrificed the ram and God had delivered Isaac from being sacrificed, Abraham and Isaac went down from the mountain and they went to Beersheba. And what Isaac was doing here is he was reconnecting with God's purpose for his life, with God's plan for his life. And once he got there, God came to Isaac and reaffirmed the covenant that God had made with Abraham. This time, before, God had spoke to him and said, if you will stay here in Gerar, I will give you all of this land. But that wasn't the only covenant that God had promised, the only thing that God had promised to Abraham. This time, God promises to Isaac that he will give him many descendants. And so God is, again, reaffirming that covenant that he made with Abraham. And God indeed would give him many descendants. Now, he only has the 2 boys. But Jacob, who we come later to know as Israel, has 12 children. And from there, all the descendants. So, when he gets there, there are 3 things that Isaac does. The first thing he does is not dig up the well and get water. That's really kind of a very, very important thing to do. You don't go very long without water. But it's interesting that Isaac here builds an altar first. And he's going back into the lifestyle of his father Abraham. Everywhere Abraham went, he built an altar first. And now Isaac has adopted that and made that part of his lifestyle. And the first thing he does is build an altar. Then he pitches his tent. He builds his house. And then he dug a well. The well was blessed by God. And his priorities were all aligned. Matthew 6, verse 33 says, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. One of the lessons of Isaac's life is that you and I need to continually check our priorities and where are we at? What is the really important thing in our life? And over the course of Isaac's life, Isaac discovered that what he really needed to do was put God first in his life. And then trust that all these other things would come together and work out. And they did. Isaac became a man of quite renown. And pretty soon those Philistines that were over there that had reclaimed those wells, he dug up. Pretty soon Abimelech and Ahuzah and Philco paid a state visit to Isaac. And Isaac, remember, he didn't like confrontation. He was a little bit suspicious when they showed up. Now what are they doing? So they came and he said, you know, you guys sent me away. Every well I cleaned up and got ready to go, you took over and I left every time. What are you doing here on my property? And they said, no, we recognize that God is blessing you. And we want a treaty because you're getting strong. And they did not, they wanted a treaty of peace so that Isaac would not do them any harm. And Isaac, the great man of peace, what does he do? He prepares a feast for them. He feeds them. And then he blesses them. And then he sends them away in peace, making a treaty and saying, I will not do you any harm. Isaac, one of his traits was that he was a great peacemaker. And God has, I can't remember now if it was last week or several weeks ago now, but I preached on confrontation. And God has given all of us quite a different approach to dealing with stress and disputes and strife and all those kind of things. And some of us, man, we just dig in and deal with issues as soon as they come. And other people are more like Isaac. And God has wired us all so that there's some balance in the world. Because it wouldn't be good if we were all hot-headed. And it wouldn't be good if we were all Isaacs and never dealt with issues. But you see here that Isaac is a peacemaker. And that's the way God wired him, and God used that in his life. Isaac had peace with the Philistines in Gerar. He had peace all around him, but the one place Isaac didn't have, and our chapter ends there, with the fact that he didn't have peace at home. Esau had married 2 pagan wives who caused a great deal of hardship and heartache for Isaac and Rebekah. And so here is Isaac, this peacemaker, who has peace all around him, except for he can't find it at home. And just a reminder to us, sometimes we get the idea of Christians that our Christian life should be stress-free, that we shouldn't ever have to deal with problems and those kind of things. But the interesting thing is, in the Scriptures, you don't ever find that to be true. The greatest of saints in the Bible had to deal with family tensions and stresses and disputes and conflicts and all of that. All of them, all the way through the Scriptures. And here's Isaac, who's got peace with everyone else around, but he's dealing with it in his own household, in his own immediate family. I was out this summer, and David Canan, I for whatever reason, chose to go to his little seminar, and he was doing a workshop this summer at summer retreat on the passage of Isaac digging wells, and he took it a whole different direction than I have this morning. But he was talking about ministry as digging wells, and the fact that ministry is just hard work, and whatever we do in the church is going to take some work. And any of you that have dug a well, I haven't, but any of you that have dug a well, that's hard work. And then it can be very frustrating because sometimes you dig a well and it's a dry well. You don't get water. And you have to move on to a new location. And sometimes a well that has been good goes dry and you have to dig a new well. Our greatest threat to well digging is our unwillingness to dig new wells when our old wells are not providing us the water that they need. That was one of the points that David brought out. And he says we get emotionally attached to the wells that we have dug in our lives because, they were the source of water in our life, and we love that and all of that. And he says sometimes when those wells go dry, or when they start to go dry, we ought to be digging new wells, but we're still attached to that well. and we don't want to move on to a new well. That was one thing about Isaac. He had no problem leaving one well and going to a new well. And he just kept moving and redigging wells. David Canaan says, when the well is functioning, we tend to quit listening to God because we have everything we need, we think. And then he says, but if we listen to God, he will have us digging some new wells even before the old well goes dry. Now, he was applying that to church life and all of that, and he was basically saying that we need to ask if the wells of our church, the things that we've been doing, that we love doing in the church, that have been productive and wonderful for us in the past, are still working today. And what new well do we need? What new ministry do we need to be effective today? And so he says we need to ask those questions in the church. We need to ask if our wells need to be repaired, or if they need to be abandoned, closed up, or if they need to be replaced with some new wells. This last year, we took a look at children's ministry here in the church, and we looked at Kingdom's Kids and Sunday School and Children's Church, and we knew we just weren't doing a great job, but that's an illustration of pulling off all three, and so we decided to abandon Kingdom's Kid. It was part of moving on from a ministry that had been wonderfully effective, but it just didn't seem to click. I don't know whether that was my fault or whose fault, or whether it just was a well that went dry. But we closed that up and we started refocused and repaired and working more on Sunday school and children's church and all of that. But that's just an illustration of sometimes we need to evaluate the wells in our life as a church. But I want to make it more personal than that. What are the wells in your life? What are the wells that have been that wonderful source in the past for you that maybe it's time for you to move on to a new well? Maybe some of you don't need to make any change at all. But are there some new wells that need dug in your life? And if they are, God will lead you that direction. And if he doesn't, don't worry about it. Because maybe you don't need to dig any new wells. But some of you may need to dig some new spiritual wells in your life. Isaac didn't just accommodate the faith of his father Abraham, but he made it his own faith. For some of you, the well that you have been trusting in is the faith of your grandparents or your parents or someone else, but that faith has not really become your own well. And some of you here need to have your own personal faith with the Lord Jesus Christ. Not just the faith of your parents, and not just the faith that, Abraham did, or your parents worked through and made their own faith. You can't hang on to that forever. You need to go, even if you redid that well, you need to dig a new well, and you need to have your own relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. Have you developed your own faith in God? Or do you simply have the faith in the God of your father or your mother or your grandmother or whatever it might be? Do you have your own faith in God? And then Isaac had gone through many of the same challenges that Abraham went through. He went through famine. Abraham went through famine, and then Isaac starts out life going through a famine. Abraham has to dig wells, and that's hard work, and here Isaac comes and he has to dig those wells, those same wells up again. Parents, and I know this because I deal with it with my own kids, we often want to protect our kids from the hard things in life that we went through. We went through the famine and we had to dig the well. And we walked uphill both ways to school. And we don't want our kids to have to do that. But here's just a little truth from the Scripture. You and I became better people because of the trials we faced. And sometimes we short our children on becoming the people that they can become because we protect them from all the struggles and pain of life. None of us like to see our children struggle. But the God who was faithful to us in our struggles can be faithful to our children in the struggles that they face. Struggles and famines and well-being are part of the process of salvation and part of the process of sanctification. And so I ask you, what struggles are you running from that you should be growing through instead? Every struggle is an opportunity for growth. And sometimes we run from them way too quick when God wants us to grow through the difficulty and the struggle. And then the last thing, this is a long conclusion, isn't it? The last thing is Isaac learned to seek God first in his life. And then he trusted that everything else would work out. And so I want to ask you, have you